This is Delhi. Please stand by for our next program. This is All India Radio. In our national program of talks tonight, we now bring you an interview entitled Greening the Aravallis, in which Vijay Dhasmana, foremost rewilder, well-known eco-warrior and conservationist of degraded ecosystems, is in conversation with Naveen K. Gupta of AIR Delhi.
My guest tonight happens to be a man who is a self-taught ecologist, calls himself a rewilder, and that's a fancy term which he will tell us about. And right now, he's perhaps the leading authority on greening the degraded habitats in northern India. Vijay Dhasmana, welcome to National Program of Talks.
Thank you, sir.
What is a rewilder, Vijay? This I came across in many articles on you in your book. I mean, is it a fancy term? Is it a new term? Is it an ecological term? What is a rewilder?
It's a fancy name that is doing rounds here, but it basically means that you are rewilding landscapes. In our human endeavor, we have sanitized cities, agriculture is sanitized, rural areas are sanitized now.
When you say sanitized, you mean?
You don't want any wildlife of any kind in your vicinity.
Flora or fauna?
More fauna. Flora, of course, not, because that's the whole idea of plants is we have a huge bias. Modern landscaping has a huge bias in terms of plants. So there is some sort of looking down upon native flora. And some are, I can understand when you see when you look at some beautiful place around the world and pick up plants and then want to show it in your landscape, I can understand that emotion. But so in terms of rewilding, why it is important is to, our cities have become sanitized. Our flora here is not native, mostly exotic. So your jacarandas, your gulmohars, you name it, they're all not from our ecologies. So rewilding would mean that you bring in the flora of this particular area into the landscape, and that creates the habitat for all kinds of life.
We'll come back to this missing species concept. That's what you've been talking about later. But you're a self-taught ecologist, and being the youngest child of the family, you got the luxury to be a rebel. You're basically MSc in physics, but you've gone totally 180 degrees to horticulture or, say, botany. How?
I think what one was interested in is to look at what is happening to the world around. And I was fortunate to look at what was happening in Enron. And that's where it led to a question. That is what we are doing.
You were one of the protesters of double.
I was too young, but yes, I was in my own way supporting the protest. The Habol is a very rich area, ecologically as well as from livelihood points of view as well. Because people are they had rich catch in that area. So people are not poor, yet they were sidelined to create something for the cities or power. I understand the need for power, but at what cost and whose cost and who's going to bear the cost. So when you have a aerial view, then you can plan. And then it doesn't matter whether you're mining Niamgiri or whether you're creating plants in the Habol, rich hotspots of biodiversity. But when you look at the ground, you have to be sensitive as to what are the areas and how you need to, tread your way towards development.
But Vijay, if I speak from a layman's point of view, we are 1.3 plus billion population. We do need development. We do need a lot more buildings. We do need a lot more roads. We do need a lot more food. We almost add Australia every year to our population. Now, if we have liberal hearts like you, raising a hullabaloo all the time in the name of environment, where will progress come from?
Yeah, so we need to redefine, I understand your question, and I want to examine it with you as to what is the life that we want to give to our people. What is the quality of life do we want to give to our people? Like you are sitting in Delhi. It is one of the most developed places in the country. It is the most polluted in the country, or in fact in the world, this region. Water is contaminated, food is contaminated, toxic. Your air is polluted. Is this the development we are looking forward to? Is this what we want to give to our future?
But we stare at survival, you see, in this country.
So always the issue is of firefighting. We are not planning. And of course, the population is a big thing. Of course, we have to have control over population and the consumption. And we have taken a journey where consumption, what Gandhiji said once, that if we go into American way of consumption, then the world will not be enough. Or Western way of consumption, world will not be enough. And that's true. What is moderation? Is there a moderation possible in a very aspiring world? Can we live? These are very complicated issues. They are not easy. But at the same time, are we responsible towards other forms of life in this world? Are we responsible for the natural features, our own personal security, natural resources security, be it Aravallis, be it the rivers, be it the mountains, or the climate? Are we intelligent enough to look at all of these things?
But how do you convince a young demographic country like India, where, middle-aged people are less and a young, powerful country is emerging? How do you expect them to forgo consumption, and how do you expect them to forgo development?
That's the challenge that I'm trying to pose, that we are, the world has shown us that we can consume. And it has only shown us one way, that you aspire for more money, for more resources, and then consume. Is this the only way? I don't think so. There are many ways of living. And therefore, the whole idea of planning and education should be focused on what are we aspiring for as a community, as a human race. And you can see why there is young people into climate action now. Why are they, putting their lives first? Because there is that we are on the verge of a crisis. We are not wanting to acknowledge it. With our consumption patterns, we have changed the whole carbon cycle in this world. Now, we either accept it or we ignore it.
In 1997, you were involved in a Jal Andolan Padyatra, where you met the who's who of the Chipko Andolan, Chandri Prasad Bhatt, the great Mr. Bahuguna, and Govind Singh Rawat and other leaders. How did they influence you?
The Padyatra was started by Dr. Anil Joshi.
Okay.
And he's Padma Bhushan, but has done many, many other yatras. But I had met Chandri Prasad ji and Sundarlal ji, not in this Padyatra, otherwise. And I wanted to know from them as to what was this journey about Chipko. Of course, I was very curious about Chipko, but also what are the challenges in mountain communities? And where did the origin of Chipko was? Was it livelihoods come resources? When you translate livelihood to resource allocation and management, then it's a larger game. Then you are in control of decision making. And I think that's what they were communicating to me. But however, there is so much I learned from them. But one takeaway was that we need to work with the system. We need to change the system, working with the people, whether it is in governance, whether it is in people who are in village communities. We'll have to work with people in bringing any kind of change.
Before we come to Aravallis, which is your magnum opus, if one can say, you were also involved in the conservation of Dudatoli forest and rehabilitation and conservation of the sloth bear. Tell us about it.
Dudatoli is a small patch of forest, about 100 square kilometers, Gwaldham in Uttarakhand.
Okay.
Gwaldham, which is a projected capital of the state of Uttarakhand. Somebody called Haim Gerola was very passionate about this jungle and wanted to save this forest. There are 3 perennial rivers that emanate from this small jungle, and the forests are very rich. So we got an opportunity to work there and try to understand the pressure on this jungle. And there were 100 villages which were sending cattle into that forest. So we are trying to mitigate this pressure in that area and set up Himalayan Community Forest Center. While in sloth bear, I was working with an organization called Wildlife Trust of India, very remarkable organization in this country, working to protect the wildlife and habitats. So there, one of our project was to work so that the sloth bear don't go into dancing bear. Plus the cubs are rehabilitated or rewilded, so to say.
Now you've been speaking about, keeping the livelihood in mind. And the Madaris went out of profession once you took to conservation and rehabilitation of sloth bear.
That's right. That's right. So the whole program was to provide them alternative livelihoods.
You provided alternative livelihoods to Madaris.
Yes. It is not easy, let me tell you that, because it's
traditional.
very harsh. It's harsh, but I think efforts were in that direction and it needed a lot of support. The communities we worked in Bhopal or in Chhattisgarh, many took to poultry, many took to, street vending with the proper cart system. And so I wouldn't say that 100% was success, but many were successful. And livelihood is a long-term, you need to support long-term. For somebody who has grown up in a particular trade and then to change the trade is not easy. So I think it needs much more support than what NGO can give, for instance. It is for the governments to come forward and, take a lead in this.
And somewhere in 2005, you met famous filmmaker, now famous environmentalist, Pradeep Kishan. How did you meet him and how did he influence you? I think you took to trees in a big way after meeting him.
Oh yes, we met on a train and he had a dream that time to create a sort of botanical park in the Uttarakhand region. And he said, I can be of some use there. And we started traveling. And I think he opened my eyes to the world of plants And I'm so ever grateful to him for this. And then restoration. So we tried to do several projects. Many of them failed. And we were successful in some.
You were involved in conservation and rehabilitation of the Roi shrublands.
Yes, together.
Together in the desert of Rajasthan. What was that all about?
So this is a project base of Nahargarh Sanctuary. There is piling up of sand on the Aravalli foothills on the southern western part. And the plant community is very different. So Pradeep was JDA, Jaipur Development Authority, met Pradeep and they said, why don't you do something in Jaipur? So he located this place and he kind of wanted to revive this particular place, restore, ecologically restore, revive and showcase that these shrublands that extend all the way to Thar Desert are very rich biodiversity point of view, unique and rich. We need to give importance to it. World over, these shrublands and desert flora there is more and more acknowledgement of it. And therefore, this gave us an opportunity to tell the world as to what Thar Desert flora is like. And they are not wastelands. They are hugely important ecological zones that we need to protect. So we teamed up together, Pradeep, me, Harpreet and Golak, and created what is called Kishan Bagh Sand Dune Park with the help of JDA, Jaipur Development Authority. So today it's a well-visited place and we are managing it.
Sand Dune Park is a very interesting name. It has sand dunes?
It has sand dunes which are fossilized, which are now stable. These are obstruction dunes, as I mentioned.
And
also in the Aravallis. There's nothing green in our semi-arid landscape. It is
but they have
phases
vegetation.
Yes, lots of vegetables.
What kind of vegetation grows in that kind of habitat?
So they are mostly xerophytic, many perennials, trees, shrubs,
When you
grasses.
say xerophytic, for a layman, how would you do that?
They are tolerant to less rainfall, harsh climates.
Cactus.
Cactus does not belong to our landscapes.
It
has
doesn't?
come from Americas.
Okay.
So what we have is Thor is not cactus. So Thor is one of the euphobias that you find. The plant community will try to adjust to the environment. The arid 200 mm rainfall in Thar, for instance, they will try to adapt.
And what kind of wildlife survives?
Oh, lots from smaller cats to jackals to foxes to reptiles of many kinds to insects to birds, great Indian bustard. It's a rich, thriving. Actually, it's a corridor for migration of maybe 100+ species of birds.
You're kidding?
Yeah.
Really?
So that's
Desert?
Yeah. Much more. Actually, I think more than that. So you'll find
migration you associate with wetlands, and this is first time I'm hearing that migration of birds is corridors.
Yeah. Why is Tal Chhapar so famous? Tal Chhapar, which is in Churu, is very, very famous for birds which are moving. And you get, I think, easily 350+ species of birds.
So what do birds find in a desertified habitat?
These are rich lands. They have huge insects life.
Oh.
And on insects are reptiles and smaller animals, and on which the birds prey.
Oh, okay.
So they are very, very productive systems. We don't acknowledge it. That's another matter. But these are very productive systems and unique systems. So what you find in a sand dune top is not what you will find in the interdune areas. So the vegetation is very different. There are acid. There are dunes which are, the soil composition is very different. There's salty dunes and so on and so forth. So they are very rich. They need to be understood better and then appreciated. So Roi is an effort to do that.
Interesting, fascinating. You were born in hills of Uttarakhand and studied in Mumbai, and then you come to Haryana. You come to a city that was at one time the cynosure of entire India, Gurgaon, and you have this old, perhaps the oldest 4 mountains in the world, Aravallis, which are totally denuded, and for a layman like me, they have no significance. They just, provide you with a bit of hilly landscape while you're traveling to, say, Rajasthan. And you came and established a 380-acre biodiversity park there. What is the significance of Aravallis in, say, a person like me in his life?
I thought this is very not so kind definition of Aravallis, but Aravallis, firstly...
If I have hurt you with my mocking tone, it is because I'm being practical here.
Yeah.
If you were to tell it to a layman, why would he give so much of importance to a denuded series of, low-level mountains?
Disjoint in the northern part of Aravallis. Yeah, I think the first thing being that these are the oldest full mountains. Do we?
Okay, so they are rich in fossils. What else?
They may not be so rich in fossils, but they have shaped the whole of northern western landscapes. One time as Himalayas, and the whole ecology that you find is unique. I mean, from anthropocentric point of view, I can say that, okay, it's impacting the climates. I can say it has a very positive role in checking desertification.
How?
These are the barriers which is not letting the movement of sand from Thar to the rich central jungles of Madhya Pradesh and other areas, or desertifying the Gangetic Plain. Aravallis are playing such an important role.
So they are important in giving us the food bowls that we have.
Absolutely. From that, plus I think Aravallis are very rich in biodiversity. You have national parks, you have sanctuaries, and so many of them in the Aravallis itself. So, they are water reservoirs. The groundwater recharge potential of Aravalli is about, in the quartzitic zone, is about 20 lakh liters per hectare. So imagine the kind of water which falls on the hills actually goes into underground or creates your seasonal streams, which are very, very important for the livelihoods of the people, communities who are living on the base of Aravallis. They have shaped life as it exists today, I would say that.
How did you stumble upon Aravalli Biodiversity Park? I believe it was an abandoned mine, a quarry.
I was contacted by a group called IAmGurgaon. Somebody, Atal Kapoor, who was designing the landscape there. He called me up through Pradeep and wanted me to help in vegetating that place. So when I asked him what is the vision, they had various ideas, from million trees, Gurgaon, to which they wanted to do in one single day, to a very manicured, in the sense, feature-led garden. And so our interaction with the whole team and then visiting several jungles around, we came up with a vision that we want to invite Gurgaon, which represents aspiration for young people, which represents also exploitation of natural resources, which also means exploration. I mean, the people who live in Gurgaon have I would say on an average, many of them would have gone abroad and looked at various wildlife parks in the world, or appreciated
huge techie population.
Huge techie population. So it was time that we kind of made a statement by saying that we are inviting the forests of Aravallis back into the city. These were abandoned mines. So we gave this vision to this place, and today it is an OECM, first OECM as I
What is an OECM?
OECM is under IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, status given to places which are rich in biodiversity. So it's called Other Effective Area-Based Conservation Measure. So the park got the status to be the first in the country, that the Haryana government felt it was significant enough to, other than protected areas such as national parks or sanctuaries, this should be created as OECM. Yeah, so it has become a biodiversity hotspot in that area, and people from all walks of life enjoy that place.
It also became an experimental ground for setting up this pet thing of yours, the missing species versus the invasive species or the alien species. Tell us about these terminologies of plants.
Yeah.
What are missing species? Because I believe you fell back to British records as well as Professor Maheshwari's book in sourcing out the missing species of Aravallis, and were quite particular about it.
Yeah, I think it's very simple in terms of rewilding approaches. What you try to do is, if you have a particular landscape that is degraded, firstly you understand why it is degraded. Like in this case, Aravalli Biodiversity Park was mined, and there were stone crushers on it. So there were trucks plying all over. So there was fire put up and excessive grazing. But when you say that, okay, I want to bring in the flora of the Aravallis, where do you look? So you'll either look into the records that people have written over the years, or you will find reference sites which you feel are important sites of biodiversity in the Aravallis. So if you look at the records of, what Maheshwari, the flora of Delhi talks about, and then what Dr. R.N. Parker's flora records of this region talk about, they give us a good palette of plants. And then when you look at Mangarbani forest, then you look at Jeer forest, then you look at Sariska forest, then you look at Jhalana forest, you realize that what you see actually is not the original forest of Aravalli. What you see is Prosopis juliflora, which is a exotic Vilaiti kikar.
Vilaiti kikar
is an exotic. The term is very interesting. It's called invasive alien species. So these were the species.
I believe it's the most invasive species in the world.
Yes, it is one of the most invasive species. It's called Mexican mesquite, was brought in, was very successful at early time. You could see the whole central ridge planted up by many species.
Thorny plant.
Thorny plant, and is very successful in that sense. And it has colonized from your salt pans to Bhuj grasslands, to many grasslands, to hills. It has colonized everything.
Thousands of kilometers.
Thousands of lakhs of square kilometers, I would say, not just thousands. It has colonized. And so what you see outside of Delhi, or in Delhi, mostly in the wilderness, is Prosopis juliflora, which is not the true forest of Aravallis. So when you look at the reference site, you get to know that these are the plant community. Like you get a very important forest called Anogesis pendula forest or dhok forest. It's found all over the northern Aravallis as well as in the Vindhyan range. Orcha, you'll find that particular jungle is called dhok.
Dhok, you mean dhak?
No, not dhak, dhok.
Dhok.
Dhok is it's one of the hardest woods in the world.
Okay.
And it forms almost like a monoculture of jungle. But because they are browsed and they are very useful for the browsing herbivores, they are, Sariska can hold a tiger population because of that. Then you also get Indian frankincense forest. Then you get dark forest. Then you get in the valleys different compositions of, Mitragainas. And even today, like in last 1 year, we have got at least 4 species that were not there recorded in Haryana Aravallis.
Oh.
So, and these are trees. I'm not talking about herbaceous plants, which there would be many, many more. So we need to open our eyes to the Aravallis. Yeah.
So what's the count of the missing species? 200 plus now? 200 were the ones that you sourced out, didn't you?
For the Aravalli Biodiversity Park, we made a list of about 200 species that we wanted to add. Some were there, some we added in terms of help them propagate there itself. But this includes trees, shrubs, climbers, grasses, ephemerals, all of it. So we did this over several years. And now what is happening is there is recruitment of the climax species like Indian frankincense, seeds are now germinating in the ground, or dhok seeds are germinating in the ground.
Okay.
So which kind of tells you that these forests are
It's a healthy forest.
It's a healthy forest. It's going to stay for a longer time. Yeah.
And what's the fauna of Aravalli Biodiversity Park?
In the park, we have it's almost like an island.
Okay.
But we have mammals, about 15 species of mammals.
15 species?
Yeah, from nilgai to porcupine to civet, mongoose to hare and jungle cats and stuff like that. There was a recent halla about a leopard spotting, but I didn't see it. Nobody saw it. Nobody could. There was no evidence to show.
So
that.
if there are leopards, that means it's growing. The forest is growing.
Or I don't know if there could be just venturing of a single individual into that landscape. It's becoming a good hotspot for birding. Birds of all kinds are seen in that landscape. For a dry, without water body landscape, you get good diversity of birds and population as well. And insects. Other day, a friend of mine called me up from the park and he was baffled. He said, "What did you do here?" I said, "What happened?" He says, "In 1 hour, I've seen 45 species of butterflies." Rajesh, who is working on butterflies now, he says, "Why can't we do this in other parts of Delhi or Gurgaon or other places?" So I was initially very reluctant, but I felt okay. That's a compliment.
That's a great sign. So tell me something, Vijay. Aren't ornamental plants helpful? I think Delhi's population, mainly tree population, is basically ornamental.
So when you say ornamental, it's a feature that it's a subjective feature, no? It's a human quality that we are giving.
So jamun, shaitut, all these are ornamental trees, aren't they? They're shady trees. They provide great cover. They are nice to look at.
Yeah, ornamental would be more in terms of how they look. And jamun is useful. Shaitut is very useful. It's a crop in many places. Ornamental, when we say like gulmohar, for instance, or a jacaranda, there is time in the year when they will show themselves off. Yeah, and then the rest of the semel is. Again, I will make a distinction because, it is ornamental. So here, ornamental is not a problem. A plant can be ornamental and very much part of the forest system, like the amaltash. It's an ornamental plant, but it's a forest plant.
Okay.
All these, when we say native species, they have evolved with the animals and insects and, fungus and whatnot, bacteria together over millions of years.
The whole ecosystem
together over millions of years. So therefore, they're not just individuals, they are interrelationships.
Okay.
And when we bring in a plant from a different landscape and introduce them in a different landscape, then they become for ornamental purpose, which is for soothing to human eye. They may not be doing ecological function. They may not be doing service to, and in many cases, they are invasive. Like for instance, lantana. Lantana is a very pretty plant. Lantana camera, for instance, was introduced.
What's the common name of Lantana camera?
It's now called lalten or lantana in various parts. But we spend crores of rupees every year to remove lantana from our national parks and sanctuaries. Yeah, because it has become invasive. A pretty plant, which was brought in as a garden plant, has now invaded all kinds of landscapes. One has to be mindful. I can understand 50, 80 years ago, we didn't have this knowledge that how a particular plant will behave. But now, having this knowledge, I think we have to be mindful what we introduce.
As a proponent of trees landscaping cities or trees shaping cities, what hope you hold for our cities in future and for a city like Delhi?
Delhi is a promising city, and I think There are various plans. We have biodiversity parks here. Yamuna Biodiversity Park, very good example.
Professor
C.R. Babu, Dr. Fayaz and the whole team. Aravalli Biodiversity Park in Vasant Kunj, and many other parks. I think there are 7 of them. Plus, there is an approach, the whole discussion on 2041 master plan. I think we, as cities, we will have to look at quality of life. I'm a firm believer that we have to give wilderness to people, even as a recreational aspect. Wilderness makes it possible for people to connect with themselves. Apart from connecting with nature, they also get connected with themselves. Therefore, we need to have wilderness patches where people can see the interrelationships happening, the birds happening. Delhi is a very, very thriving bird capital in the world. Yeah, so we have close to 400 species of birds that are recorded over years. We have to give wild spaces and connect them. Create corridors. Your central ridge has to be connected to other wilderness areas, and southern ridge has to be connected to other wild areas. And we have to give opportunity for people to connect with this wild and learn from these wild and take it in themselves. And I think that's when cities will be places to cherish, other than achieving goals, personal goals, but also to quality of life will improve.
Parting question: do you impart your green message to the children, because they are going to be the holder of this legacy?
Oh yes, we have programs like the Aravalli Biodiversity Park is now under the trusteeship of India's leading two-wheeler company, and they have done a fabulous job in the last 1 year to look at the vegetation, helping in removal of invasive species, but having programs for children and school. I lend myself wherever there is a possibility to participate in any events like that. We did a program with world's leading film studio over 3 years to get schools to think creating wilderness. So we gave a fellowship of about 5 lakhs for a particular project of creating wilderness patches in and around their school campuses. So we had some remarkable projects in the NCR region. Somebody wanted to bring back sparrows. Some schools wanted to protect a wetland, and some, they wanted to take up the verges, and so on and so forth. So I think there is growing awareness about what we need to do, and I would be very happy to partner with people who are doing, like WWF or BNHS. They are doing great job in educating, and I would like to help them in however possible.
Vijay Dhasmana, it has been a learning experience for me, knowing so much about trees and how they affect our lives. And I wish you great power, because it's people like you who hold the key to a better green tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
In our national program of talks tonight, you just heard an interview entitled Greening the Aravallis, in which Vijay Dhasmana, foremost rewilder, well-known eco-warrior and conservationist of degraded ecosystems, was in conversation with Naveen K. Gupta of AIR Delhi. This program was produced and presented by Naveen K. Gupta and came to you from the Delhi station of All India Radio.